What's interesting about entrepreneurship, so what you said is accurate. It really gets down to, is the problem hiring the salesperson, or is the problem having the money to hire the salesperson, which it's really a money problem. You really have to have enough margin and enough money to say, all right, I'm going to hire this person and have enough money to cover their salary for a year, because it's going to take a year. It's not going to take 3 months. I would rather spend more money and get a good salesperson and invest in it for a year than get a cheaper salesperson and think they're going to pull it off, because in my experience, it just doesn't happen. I just hired somebody my age a year ago who came from the corporate world that was selling carpeting, major big accounts. It's working. He's bringing in major business now because he knows where it's at. He knows how to approach it. You could hire people all day long for a $25,000 base and a percentage, and they're just going to go in circles.
But could you have hired that person years ago? When
Yeah,
you were just...
I wasn't smart enough to. Sometimes, goes in a lot of areas with business. Sometimes cheap is worse. I mean, it's not what you're, like I always say, the cheapest thing in the world is a cheap lawyer. The most expensive thing in the world is a cheap lawyer. I mean, when you think about it, do you really want a cheap lawyer? Really? Do you want a cheap brain surgeon? Well, it goes to outside sales. You want a cheap outside salesperson, you're going to get a cheap. They're not going to bring the business in. If you've ever looked at successful sales organizations, you will see the more successful salesperson can bring in 5 times more than someone who's not. It's the Pareto rule, the 20-80 rule, that the lead salesperson carries the whole business, and the rest of them are just, just there. So the answer is, the phrase "I can't afford" is a very tricky phrase in business. I don't use that word. I think afford fits in personal. You can't afford a condo in Hawaii. You can't afford this. In business, it's a matter of, does it make sense? So the question is, can you afford a cheap salesperson? And my answer is no, because a cheap salesperson is not going to bring in business. It's just going to cost you money. So at the end, the cheap salesperson is going to cost you 3 times more than the expensive salesperson, because at the end of the day, if the salesperson does what they're supposed to, they're not costing you much at all. They brought in, you bring in the $100,000 salesperson, they find $1 million worth of business. That's 10%.